The largest empire in history is not being defeated by missiles, but by a simple ledger of red ink. Every day, the United States government creates a new financial record. That record is the national debt, and it now stands at over $35 trillion. But what does that number really mean? Why is a massive national debt not just an economic problem, but a geopolitical ticking time bomb? And why is the world secretly betting that the US can no longer afford to be the global boss? This is not about complicated economics. This is about a country losing its credit card and being forced to move out of the neighborhood. We are going to explain, in simple terms, the 3 ways this massive debt is forcing the US to surrender its power around the world, creating a massive, dangerous vacuum that its rivals are already fighting to fill. We start with a simple question: why did the US government get away with borrowing so much money for so long without its currency crashing? For the last 50 years, the US has had a superpower credit card. Most countries cannot just print money to pay their bills, but the US could. The world accepted this because everyone trusted the US dollar. Every bank and every major nation bought US debt. It was like the safest savings account in the world. This allowed the US to fund wars, build bases, and send aid around the globe, all on credit. But that trust is now breaking. When a country's debt grows faster than its ability to make money, the world gets nervous. The IMF, which is like the world's financial doctor, recently warned that the US debt is getting closer to the levels of countries like Italy or Greece, countries known for financial chaos. The world is looking at Washington and seeing politicians fight over simple bills and refusing to be responsible. This is a crucial point. Losing trust is worse than losing money. When the world loses trust, the game changes completely. How does this lack of trust hurt the US? It forces the US to pay more interest, a bigger monthly bill, just to borrow money. It's like having a terrible credit score, and suddenly, you have to pay much more every month to keep your house. That interest bill is the single biggest sign that the US Superpower Credit Card is being silently cut up by the rest of the world. The US debt bill is now so massive that it is forcing the government to make cuts. Why is the military, the very thing that protects US global power, the most likely victim? The interest payment on the national debt is rising faster than any other cost. It is quickly becoming the biggest single expense of the US government, easily beating out money spent on education, infrastructure, or even the defense budget. Think of it like this. Your house payment, the debt interest, is so huge that you can no longer afford your car payments, the military bases. Every dollar spent on interest is a dollar that cannot be used to pay for a naval fleet in Asia or an army base in Europe. The US has over 750 military bases scattered across the planet. These bases are the physical representation of its power. But if the US can no longer afford the huge maintenance and staffing costs, it will be forced to retreat from many of these locations. This is the ultimate surrender. The moment the US closes a base, it creates a power vacuum, an empty space that someone else will immediately fill. How does this change the world? When the US retreats from a country, its rivals, especially China and Russia, do not wait. They step in with their own ships, their own money, and their own rules. The debt disaster will not end the US empire with a bang, but with the quiet sound of a base being decommissioned because the bill was simply too high. The debt crisis is not just making the US weaker, it is making its rivals stronger. Why are the countries the US fears most now using this debt to build their own powerful system? This debt crisis is making the entire world nervous about keeping their money tied up in the US. They are looking for ways out, and China is happily giving them an option. This is the great global rejection of US money. Countries are buying gold instead of US debt. They are signing deals to trade oil in the Chinese yuan, as we discussed in our last video. They are moving their money into new, non-US controlled groups like BRICS. They are saying, "We don't want the risk from your debt problems." For decades, the US could tell the world what to do because it controlled the money. Now, that power is being eroded by its own financial irresponsibility. The debt is the ultimate betrayal of trust, signaling to the world that the US can no longer manage its own house, let alone the world's. The simple truth is this: the US debt disaster is handing power to its rivals. By becoming unreliable and drowning in its own spending, the US is forcing the world to build a new system of money and power, a system that is guaranteed to keep the U.S. out. The cost of the debt is the final, irreversible loss of America's place at the top. You have just seen how debt is forcing the U.S. to surrender its global power. But there is a greater, silent threat. As the U.S. retreats, another power is moving in with a much smarter, much quieter strategy for global control. China is not building 750 military bases. It is building a new, global empire with a devastating tool: debt contracts. China is using the promise of cheap roads and bridges to gain control over crucial global ports and resources. We are breaking down this silent, invisible takeover, China's Silk Road trap, in our next deep dive. If you want to understand how debt is becoming the new military base, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss that crucial report when it drops in the next 3 days. Thank you for watching.